for our audience with visual disabilities. This conversation is taking place between two people over video conference. At left is a woman in a white sweater, Deborah Conwell, and at right is a woman in glasses, Dr. Olivia. Mrs. Conwell is sitting in a living room, while Dr. Olivia is in front of an artificial office background.
Welcome to AIR4VR Counselors. I'm Dr. Olivia. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're joined by Deborah Conwell, a certified community work incentives coordinator, who also has 20 years of working with individuals that have received services through vocational rehab programs. Deborah, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great having you. So let's start by you simply sharing with us just your experience working with individuals receiving VR services.
Okay. So I graduated from the University of Montana with a degree in communication studies and human and family development. So I knew I wanted to work in an area where I was, interacting with individuals and somehow in a role where maybe I was teaching or just having a good, fulfilling position as part of my life. And so I was hired on through Community Medical Center as a job developer initially. So I worked as an employment specialist, as a job coach. I did the supported employment, extended employment program. That basically morphed into doing job analysis and basically everything you could think of that's related to job development, community work experiences. And that led me to learning more about outreach programs and benefits planning. So I initially worked for 12 years for the hospital, and then I moved into my own business as a benefits planning coordinator.
Okay. Well, can you tell us more about that current role that you're serving as a certified community work incentives coordinator?
Yes, so I feel like this role is so important for individuals that are looking at returning to work or going into employment for the very first time. So if we're focusing on youth, if folks don't understand how benefits are impacted by employment, then it can come up at a later time and really affect that employment process. So I like to do a lot of pre-planning and education and working with families on what are your goals and how will employment affect your benefits so that they can pre-plan, knowing that the ultimate goal is work, because work is so important for all of us.
So what concerns or questions do employers have about work experiences for youth with disabilities? And how do you go about addressing these concerns?
So initially when I start working with employers and explaining to them about the program and kind of what our goals and expectations are, oftentimes one of the most important questions employers have is obviously, what are their responsibilities? So I think that they're looking at, obviously they're running a business and they have other employees that they're taking care of, and they just need kind of a breakdown of how much time is this going to take and what is that going to look like for them, to ensure that taking on another individual is going to be successful and that they're going to have enough time to mentor that person. And I know that they also really look at what kind of supports is that person going to need. So are they going to have a job coach coming in? Is that going to be added pressure to their employees to provide some additional training and stuff? So I always look at both sides of that too, because we want to build natural supports on the job. And I think young folks, especially in their first few job experiences, they want to be independent and they want to, be part of things at that employment site. And sometimes having that job coach there 100% of the time can be helpful, but it can be hurtful at times if the person's trying to spread their wings and,
Exactly.
and learn how to fly. So, so I know that that's always something that I like to address. You know, I like to talk about what are the goals of that experience. So, what are the employer's goals based on the program that we're asking them to participate in, but also what is the goal for the student. So making sure that that's understood. I think things come up too about liability. So is that student going to be covered under workers' compensation? How are they going to be paid for their time? How long will the experience last? Because in my experience, if the time frame is too short, sometimes it's hard to get employers to buy into that. Because, you know, we want to give enough time to, you know, make it worthwhile for everybody to have a good learning experience and growing experience in that job. I also talk a lot about, you know, the potential for, if things work out, you know, them being able to hire them at the end and what that might look like too, because ultimately that would be ideal if somebody really enjoyed their work experience and there was a chance for a little part-time job at the end. So that's just like a lovely bonus. Talk a lot about the schedule, because oftentimes if we're talking about youth, we're looking at, you know, their family obligations and we're looking at their school obligations, and oftentimes there's medical appointments and stuff like that. So really looking at what does the employer have available compared to, you know, the schedule. So schedule's huge. Also, what tasks are available and needing to be done. Maybe we're working with somebody who has limited skills and there's, you know, 10 different pieces to that job. Maybe we start with doing 3 or 4 pieces of that job so that it's not so overwhelming. And so I like to look at what is the student capable of performing right away, what kind of training is necessary. So there's all of those pieces of the puzzle. And then I talk about an escape route. So sometimes setting things up and working with an individual and working with an employer, maybe it's not the right match. Maybe everybody goes into it and it's a really positive thing to start, but maybe, you know, it takes a turn for the worse or something isn't meshing right. So I like to also make sure that everyone knows if the student is not happy, they can come to me and tell me. And, you know, that open communication, you know, what is it about the job that's not working or what is working? And then also with the employer, because I always think you want that employer to be there for the long term. You want that to be a site that other folks can potentially go to as well. And so if things don't work out, what does that look like? How can we end it in a positive way to where there aren't hurt feelings and, you know, people are upset at the end? Because ultimately we want this to be positive. You know, this is work is a good thing. We want to promote that. So in addressing all of those different types of concerns, I always say, never overpromise. I really have found it very difficult working in the community if other agencies are out there and they're making promises to employers that they're not keeping. Then sometimes I go to talk to an employer and that employer is like, oh, been there, done that, you know, it didn't work out. And so in talking with employers, I think they just want to hear clear and realistic expectations of what it's going to look like, and that over promising or saying somebody can do something that they can't do, I just don't see how that's helpful. So you know, focusing more on those soft skills, you know, as students are learning, like, let's talk about showing up on time and making sure you're wearing a clean uniform, and you know, how do you clock in and out, and who are you going to go to if there's a problem? And so I think just addressing those basic concerns about, you know, who's your contact person, and when are you going to contact me, and when are you going to contact the employer, and those types of things. As long as you have that foundation established, then you can usually problem solve through things that come up.
Okay.
So yeah, I think just that communication and finding common ground is huge.
Yeah, so you just gave some really just wonderful tips, and I was just curious, as some of these VR professionals, just are there some additional things that they could do before they even approach an employer to set up a work experience or an internship for a young person to help this process go even smoother?
Yes, I think one of the biggest things that I noticed early on is that the voc rehab counselors were so good at addressing like the skills and abilities and looking at interests and aptitudes and stuff like that, that sometimes they would be getting ready to set up a work experience, and then all of a sudden some really basic things were missed, such as, does the student have an ID? Do they have a social security card? Do they have a copy of their birth certificate? Do they have those basic things that they need in order to even initially get set up for getting paid and making sure, you know, work comp is covered and those types of things. So I think just really getting back to the basics is really helpful, so that that person is really ready to get started if the employer says, yeah, we're ready to go, so that it's not taking another month to get an ID, you know, or something like that. So I think something, those basic things. Also looking at what's transportation going to look like? How is that person going to get to work? And how much time, you know, maybe they have some classes that they don't have to take through their high school, and so they can leave school early because it's part of a work program, and so that it gives them some more time in there. So I think that working with that whole team, you know, working with the school, working with the family and stuff, and getting that all set up even prior to approaching the employer, so that, you know, it's, you know, some of those things are ready to go.
Yeah. So doing, it sounds like being proactive, and like you mentioned, like getting a lot of those, just really thinking through a lot of these scenarios ahead of time. So that way, when you do set up a work experience, you're not having to double back and, you know, go back, but, oh no, this isn't aligned with their schedule, or we have documentation that's missing, that could end up delaying the young person's start, or even could hinder them getting that placement because maybe it's not within the employer's time frame anymore.
Right.
So, okay.
Yeah, I think it's so important to know ahead of time, you know, are we going to offer 100% job coaching, you know, to start? Is there going to be somebody with them? And then how is that going to be backed out as they learn? Those types of things too. I've seen work assessments being, you know, everything's ready to go, you know, they're going to get paid and they know when they're supposed to start, and the employer's excited, the student's excited, and then all of a sudden there isn't a job coach available. So I think just making sure that some of those things are in place to have that support.
Okay. Well, you've given some great tips. I mean, just great information to our listeners. And I was wondering if there were any final words that you want to share with our VR professionals as they're listening.
I guess I would say that from my background with benefits planning, it's so important to look at the whole person. Every case is obviously going to be so individualized. But if we don't look at their support team, what benefits they're currently receiving, what benefits they may be eligible to receive, to ensure that there's pre-planning and education with the student and their family ahead of time. There could be, you could end up being, you know, you're driving down the road and you hit this pothole because the student maybe didn't share with you that they're receiving a benefit that they're going to lose if they go to work. And so if that's not pre-planned, obviously, then down the road, if that benefit is jeopardized, that's very scary if it has not been discussed and there isn't some information about how employment's going to impact that. So I think that when looking at work is so great, obviously, for self-esteem and for just growing and learning and connecting with your community. But if it means that you're going to lose something that you have to have, medical care or financial means or something like that, it's not going to be successful if those things are not addressed ahead of time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Deborah, for coming and sharing this time with us and sharing your wisdom and your work experience. I think you've shared some great tips for our listener. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.